and hope you're doing great this beautiful second Tuesday of May 2025, May 13, 2025. Welcome to Amo Get Ready Communications. It's a joy, it's a delight, it's a pleasure to welcome you to yet another edition of Driving Economic Growth with Innovation here on Amo Get Ready Communications. My name is Tolu Omodaro. How have you been? How's your week been and how has your month been? Last week we looked at the topic of, or we concluded the topic of designing national strategies for research commercialization. Designing national strategies for research commercialization. We had started this 2 weeks ago, and we went deeper into it last week. How do we design, especially the how, right? 2 weeks ago, we had established the why. Why do we need to design national strategies for research commercialization? In other words, we're making the case for research commercialization. We're advocating for research commercialization. Then last week, we spent more time pointing out the how, the roadmap, so to say, the path to the national strategies for research commercialization. In other words, now that we know that we ought to have national strategies for research commercialization, we then need to look at how exactly do we design these national strategies for research commercialization. So let's quickly look at some of the highlights of what we discussed last week, and then we will go into the depth of this week. Right. Once again, my name is Tolu Omodaro. This is Amo Get Ready Communication. The program, all quarter, since the beginning of the quarter, has been driving economic growth with innovation. And we are looking at the recap of last week's episode, which was on designing national strategies for research commercialization. Some of the things we talked about last week, we talked about one, again, flowing from 2 weeks ago. For those of us who may not have joined, remember to check us out on YouTube, Amo Get Ready Communications. You can check out these episodes. Flowing from 2 weeks ago, we had said that as much as possible, the goal should not be technology for the sake of technology for the private sector, or innovation for the sake of innovation at the national level, like we're discussing, right? It should be innovation for the sake of economy. So very clear economic goals should be tied to innovation, investments, and activities. I repeat, very clear economic goals should be tied to innovation, investments, and activities. Of course, like we've been saying, there is the part where we just have exploratory innovation, and that is fine, that should be funded. But at a point, the exploratory innovation insights garnered, generated from the exploratory innovation should not be channeled into exploitative innovation, right? The exploitative innovation is one that is directed more at ensuring maximum returns on investment, commercialization, economic growth and development, and so on and so forth, right? So very clear economic goals should be tied to innovation, investments, and activities, such that even those who are creating and inventing, as well as their support teams, understand that there is a direct economic goal in mind as they anticipate and respond to market needs and also stimulate them. I repeat, very clear economic goals should be tied to innovation, investments, and activities, such that even those who are creating and inventing, as well as their support teams, understand that there is a direct economic goal in mind as they are anticipating and responding to market needs, as well as stimulating them, right? So when we're talking about driving economic growth with innovation, one of the things that we've said on this program thus far is that those who are creating and inventing should do so in anticipation of and response to market needs, right? So when you're anticipating market needs and you're responding to market needs that are already visible, you are more likely to drive economic growth with innovation than when you're just doing it without connection with the market needs. But there's another level of innovation, though, where you are also stimulating market needs, right? I will give examples of that in the previous episode. Now, when we do this, it guarantees the necessary sync between national innovation strategies, policies, processes, activities, and economic goals. Very, very important, right? If you're not responding to market needs, if you're not anticipating market needs, and if you're not stimulating market needs, there may be no effective synchronization. There may be, but it may be casual, it may be weak, right? There may not be a strong and effective synchronization between national innovation strategies, policies, activities, and so on, and economic goals, right? So the innovation must be directed at helping to attain national economic goals is one important thing. Now, coming to the how, like I was saying earlier, which was one thing we dwelt on, now that we know why we have to, connect innovation with economic goals, or now that we know why we have to design research commercialization strategies, the question then is, how do we develop research commercialization strategies? And these are some of the things we said last week. Again, I'll just share the highlights. Please visit our YouTube page, and you would see the previous episodes of this and other programs, other rich policy rich programs that we often bring to you week after week, right? So how to develop a research commercialization strategy? We shared about 5 critical points. 1, examine if there was ever one. It's always important to start with what existed. Was there ever a research commercialization strategy, whether explicit or implicit? Because sometimes, like we've been saying, as we talked about codification, sometimes when it comes to innovation, certain things exist, but they are not explicitly codified. They're not, articulated. They're not patented, right? So as you are trying to find out whether there was ever a research commercialization strategy in your nation, it's important to examine whether there was one, not just explicitly, but also implicitly, because sometimes you have these things implicitly. In other words, they are implied and they are in the form of tacit knowledge, right? They are hidden in the minds of people, but they've not been articulated, they've not been documented, not to talk of patented. Right, so examine if there was ever a research commercialization strategy, whether explicit or implicit. Now, determine whether the existing research commercialization strategy worked or not, right? Whether it worked wholly or it worked partially. Very important, right? When you know whether it worked or not, you now need to know, number 3, why did the parts that worked, whether it worked partially or it worked in totality, what were the reasons? What were the factors that enabled the effectiveness of the parts or the whole that worked? Very important. Why did the parts that work? The number 4, what were the hindrances that kind of got in the way of the parts that didn't work? Whether it was a part of the research commercialization strategy that worked, that didn't work, or the whole of it that didn't work. What were the hindrances, right? That were barriers that were barriers to the effectiveness of the research commercialization strategy. And of course, very importantly, we also said appreciate the criticality of collaboration to research commercialization. Very, very important, as the studies continue to show. The studies continue to show that research commercialization is a very collaborative effort. Very important. I want to say something quickly about this week. This week, we're going to look a little bit more into the factors that, if you want to say it this way, the critical factors for research commercialization. I'll say that again. Critical factors for research commercialization. What are some of the things that need to be in place for us to be able to, effectively commercialize research? Now, like we've been saying since the beginning of this program, driving economic growth with innovation is about ensuring that we don't have research for research's sake, but we have research for the sake of economic growth. We don't have innovation for innovation's sake, but we have innovation for the sake of economic development. However, there are certain factors that are likely to enhance the chances of effective commercialization of research. I repeat, there are certain factors, right, certain enablers, certain stimulants, certain catalysts that are likely to ensure that there is a successful commercialization of research. Right, so what we're trying to do is to say, okay, let us look at the factors that are likely to stimulate or to guarantee, I think I prefer that word. What are the factors that are likely to guarantee the effective commercialization of research, so that we are not just, pouring water in a basket. So we're not just having low-level innovation efficiency, like we said last week. Last week we talked about measuring the efficiency of our innovation. In other words, it's important to measure how much innovation output we are getting for the input we are making, right? We give an example of the Global Innovation Index that measures this, and there are many other measures. We can also create our own measures at national levels. What is important is that for every one US dollar, or for every one Great Britain pounds or euro or naira or shilling, whatever currency you are using, or yuan, for every one input, right? For every one deposit, if I can use that word, that you, every one ounce of deposit that you make into your innovation investments, innovation activities, innovation processes, innovation policies, innovation strategies, it's important that you are measuring as a nation the output that you are getting, and ultimately these outputs should be about economic and social development, ultimately, right? And so as you're measuring, you'll be able to tell as a nation what are the things that are working, because it's not just about measuring if it's working, it's also about identifying the factors that are enabling the effectiveness or efficiency and the factors that are disabling. And that's why from the recap of last week we said it's important to identify the factors that may be stimulating the effectiveness of your innovative activities, and also identify the factors that may be barriers, to the effectiveness of innovation. So this week, like I said, we're going to be looking more into the factors that enable the effectiveness of your innovative activities, the factors that guarantee the efficiency, that ensure that as much as possible, you are getting your bang for the buck, right? In other words, you are getting maximum returns on the investment. So that's what some of the things we're going to be talking about this week. We are not going to look at the barriers. We're going to be looking at the stimulants, the catalyst for innovation, right? Especially innovation there, emphasizing the commercialization of research, right? Remember, innovation is not innovation until it is implemented or until it is commercialized. It's all the way from conceptualization to commercialization. We've been saying that since last quarter. If we don't have it from conceptualization to commercialization, we may have creativity, but that's no innovation. So what are the factors that enable us go all the way from conceptualization to commercialization? In other words, what are the factors that enable us drive economic growth in innovation? What are the factors that enable us get optimal returns on our innovation investments? Now let's look at some of the things. We'll probably take just 5 main points today, and we would wrap it up for the sake of time. Now, one of the first things that we've been seeing again and again is an entrepreneurship mindset, right? An entrepreneurship mindset has been said to play an important role in helping a nation gain competitive advantage with innovation. I repeat, an entrepreneurship mindset, right? And not just the mindset, but also the entrepreneurial resources, the entrepreneurial support, right? That those who are ready to go all the way with commercialization need. That entrepreneurial support plays a critical role in helping nations gain competitive advantage through innovation. Very, very, very important, right? A study was conducted in 1999 on innovation, and when they published the study, they looked at it. The study was investigating this what they call the success model of technology commercialization, right? And when they looked at that, they found that one of the important things is that the entrepreneurial factor is a very critical catalyst for innovation commercialization. And this goes back to what we've been saying. We're not going to repeat some of the things we've said in earlier episodes, but this goes back to what we've been saying, that when we are raising inventors and we're raising scientists, it's important that we also give them the multidisciplinary orientation. So much as they are inventing and creating, they understand that to begin with, there must also be the mentality of profit, if I can put it that way, right? There must be the perspective of profit, like how do we profit of this? This is very, very important, because this 1999 study shows that entrepreneurship plays an important role, a critical role in helping nations gain the competitive advantage. So from the beginning, ab initio, it's important that they are inventing on they are creating with the mindset of profit. Very important. In other words, they are creating with the mindset that their creations must add significant value to economic growth and development. Very important. Another factor that we've seen is that many times we have methods for efficiently promoting commercialization have not been made significantly. In other words, they've seen that yes, governments, national governments, they have been conducting all kinds of investigations into how they can achieve research commercialization, and various opinions have been collected, like through focus group studies, through interviews, through surveys. However, what they are seeing is that, and this is a 2024 study, by the way, in South Korea, what they are seeing is that they have not been able to translate all of this into creative commercialization strategies, effective commercialization strategies. So they've gathered a lot of opinions, they've gathered a lot of insights, they've gathered a lot of perspectives, right, on what it is that will be needed to ensure that there is research commercialization, but all of this has not yet translated into sufficient creations of commercialization processes, commercialization strategies. Last week I was saying that it appears that we need to do more research on commercialization, and I was also saying last week that it's important for nations to begin to establish institutes of research commercialization. And one of the things that the research is also showing, the studies is also showing, is that when in order to up, if I can use that word as a verb, or if I use the word to increase, right, in order to enhance the creation of commercialization strategies, that's research commercialization strategies, they are also saying there must be increased funding. Right, I said this last week and I'm repeating it. It's important for there to be a funding. Right, the research is saying there needs to be not just a system for linking commercialization of research with policy, and that is described as creating strategic policies. Right, when you begin to link the commercialization of research with strategic policies, especially economic goals, economic strategies, then you're more likely to achieve this. But they are also saying that in addition to creating that system, there must be a funding for that system. I think that's really, really, really important, right? It's not enough to fund, I would not want to use the word innovation in that context. I would say it's not enough to fund the invention of new things, right? Of new technologies. They must also fund the process of commercializing the new technologies. That's one thing that is identified as missing. Right, we must also begin to fund the research into how well can we, what is the best method, what's the best path, what's the best route, so to say, in some countries, or routes, like they'll say in other countries. What's the best route to commercializing this innovation, or this invention? Otherwise, nations may not get the maximum returns on their innovation investment, and for me, that is highly inefficient, very, very inefficient. So, in addition to putting emphasis on entrepreneurship, creating an entrepreneurial mindset for those who are creating, in addition to establishing systems that would guarantee that we now have more creations around research commercialization processes, there must also be the funding, right? Because if you don't provide sufficient funding, again, how do we test? How do we refine? How do we scale? And so on and so forth, right? It's important for there to be dedicated resources, dedicated funding for this initiative. I think that's the word I would like to, the research commercialization initiative. That's how I like to capture it. Now, one other thing that I want, two more things, but I'll take the first one and I'll take the next one. Two more things that we also have to understand is that there is a time process to this. When I saw this from the research, I wasn't surprised at all. The research indicates that the process of linking commercialization to research is complex and takes a long time, right? I'll say that again. The research indicates that it takes a long time to connect research to commercialization. In other words, we can talk about it, we can put the process in place, we can even put the funds in place, we can allocate resources including human capital, we can put systems, but we still need to understand that it will require some time. Now the question is, what happens with time, right? Because many times in some countries, I won't say in all countries, in some countries, investors are eager to get the returns on their investment once they put the money down for investment, or even government sometimes. Hopefully less of government and more of private sector investors do that. But generally, when people put their money down, they are eager to get their returns on the investment. For me, what is important to note here is that, one, when we are talking about research commercialization, there needs to be enough compensation for the time spent. I'll say that again. When we are talking about research commercialization, there needs to be enough commercialization for the time spent. And I'm speaking not just as somebody who creates processes and who tries to create new things, or we are not speaking just as an organization that's Amogate that creates new things. We are also speaking as an organization that also knows what it means to invest in new processes, right? So when we are dealing with research commercialization and we are attracting funds, whether private or public sector funds, it's important to, one, have sufficient stakeholder engagement, right? We said this last week and we're bringing it up again, the kind that sets realistic expectations as to the likely the likely payback period. It's very important. When those expectations are realistic, those who are willing and able to commit for the long haul will then commit their resources. And those who are not willing to commit from the long haul would decide what they want to do. But it's important to realize that time element may not necessarily be be capable of being shortchanged or being reduced, right? So that when we are now going into the research commercial, remember now we are talking about the fact that so far the studies are indicating that we don't have enough new ways of commercializing research, and that enough creativity has not been displayed. And we are now advocating for more research into research commercialization, more studies into research commercialization, more funding on the studies of research commercialization, and so on and so forth. We are now adding a clause that these studies may not necessarily bring immediate returns. Very important. So wherever the funds for the studies are coming from, it's important that such investors are given realistic expectation, because part of what we are seeing from the studies is that the process of commercializing research is complex. It's not surprising to us. The reason why it's not surprising is that since last week and even last quarter, we've already been mentioning the fact that there is a lot of multi-stakeholder collaboration, right? And you have sometimes even multi-sectoral collaboration. We said that last week, we said that last quarter too, when we're looking at developing national evaluation systems for absorptive capacity. And whenever you have several stakeholders, you typically at the minimum, there'll be more time required to bring all the stakeholders on the same page, right? To bring all the stakeholders in alignment, to get all the stakeholders in sync. And that process can very well be time-consuming, time-taking. So it is not surprising to us that the research is indicating that the process of research commercialization is a complex one and therefore can take time. And there is nothing wrong in that. There is nothing wrong, especially given the scale of the research that is being commercialized and given the kind of returns that are expected, right? I gave the example of Apple products. I think Apple is currently bringing in about 3 trillion, if I'm not wrong. I was reading just this week that if Bill Gates hadn't given away part of his money, it would have been worth $1 trillion, not billion, $1 trillion by now, right? So I'm saying that so that we know that when we are investing in innovative products and services, and it looks like it's taking time, we also have to ask ourselves, what is the expected return on this investment? The more the expected returns, the more the time is likely to take to, gain the returns, or to sort of have a adequate compensation for the investment. But one thing is sure, an idea that is worth being commercialized will certainly typically overcompensate the investor. And these are the frank, candid conversations that should be made when attracting investors' funds into commercialization of research. That's number one. Number two, in terms of the regulatory processes as well, including the, for instance, the interest rate, for instance, the tenor, loan tenors, and so on and so forth. These are reasons why we need to have more investigation into what it takes typically, and we need to have government supporting investment into innovation by ensuring there is adequate and effective regulation. I repeat, these are the reasons why we need to have government supporting investment into research commercialization, by ensuring that there are proper regulations and they are also effective and they are far-reaching. They are foresighted and far-reaching. So, what else do you need to bear in mind as you embark on this journey to research commercialization? We've spoken about the fact that, one, as of today, the research indicates that we don't have enough creativity around the research commercialization process. So we need to and this is not just about the government, but government taking the lead, and also we can have multi-stakeholders coming together, fellowships, grants, institutes coming together to do more research into efficient paths to research commercialization. It's really important, right? That's one. Two, we've also talked about the fact that an entrepreneurial mindset, generally, when you have entrepreneurship, not just the mindset, but also the support. Entrepreneurship plays a critical role in helping nations to gain competitive advantage from innovation. We've mentioned that. We've also said that generally, the innovation process can be complex and therefore takes time, and so the support processes, especially from the regulatory point of view, should factor that in. And when investors are also coming in to plow in their funds, to put in their funds into the research commercialization process, they should also have candid assumptions communicated to them. They should be clear about what they are getting into. But of course, again, like we've seen from several investors, when they go through the whole org, it's usually worth the process. Is usually worth the wait. They usually get more than enough to compensation. Is a process. It can be a complex process and it does take some time. However, it is very doable. But when we are factoring in when nations factor in how much of a time it can take, it helps nations to establish more effective processes for research commercialization. Another thing we've said this week is that generally there has not been sufficient research into effective paths to research commercialization. That's what the studies are showing. A study as recent as 2024 in a nation like South Korea is still indicating that there is insufficient research into maybe I won't use the word research, I would say there is insufficient inventions and creations of effective paths to research commercialization, right? So these are things to take note of. These are things we've been conversing for, especially since the beginning of this program, and I think in the last 2 weeks we've been saying that we need to begin to establish National Institutes of Research Commercialization that will be focused and will have an exclusive mandate of identifying the most efficient paths to research commercialization. Research cannot be for the sake of research, it has to be for the sake of economic growth, and to enhance that, to facilitate that, to foster that, to stimulate that, there needs to be more studies into pathways, effective and efficient pathways to research commercialization. So we just share a couple of more things and we begin to round off for this week, right? So another thing to take note of is that I think a 2015 study was conducted on the success factors and performance improvement of public research and development transfer. I repeat, a 2015 study was conducted on the success factors and performance improvement of public research and development transfer. Not just general research and development, but actually public research and development transfer. In other words, even for the research and development that is not necessarily patented or not necessarily restricted, how well does this distill? Now, more of such researches need to be conducted. I don't know if a 2015 one is recent enough. I know another one was conducted in 2021. Was it 2021? Yes, I think one was conducted in 2021 into the factors. Again, it was about the factors that enable research commercialization, right? One of the things, a study conducted in I think 2019, this excited me. A 2019 study looked at supplier participation and buyer strategic decisions. Supplier participation and buyer strategic decisions. This was a 2019 study. Now, why this excited me? Remember last week we said when you're trying to do research for the sake of commercialization, when you're trying to do innovation for the sake of economic growth, you need to anticipate customer needs, anticipate the market needs, respond to market needs, and then stimulate the market needs. So I thought more of these kind of studies need to be conducted that are specifically looking at consumer behavior. What are the reasons why suppliers participated in the commercialization of this research? If we created a new product, what were the reasons why the suppliers felt inclined to participate? What were the factors informing the buyer strategic decision? When I say strategic here, I'm talking about the scale. When buyers buy in scale, in volume, when they buy enough to impact the economy, what are the factors? Is it location? Is it price? Is it effectiveness? It's important to know so that when we now go on to either modify the existing products or to create new products as nations, we can be guided. Remember, we've said that, invention is different from commercialization. You can invent a product, but if you're not in tune, we've been saying this is last quarter, if you're not in tune with the industry, if you're not in tune with the market, if you don't know why they are buying or why they are rejecting the product, then you may not be able to fine tune accordingly. So we think that more of these kind of studies into supplier participation and buyer strategic decisions need to be conducted. And that's why research commercialization, like I said some minutes ago, it's a very complex process, and it's also a multi-sectoral process. It's a multi-stakeholder process. It's not just about the person creating, it's also about the marketing. Like we've been saying, there's research marketing or innovation marketing, and those factors help you to know as an organization, as a nation, why exactly is the market responding or not responding to your product as intended or as desired. Very, very, very important, right? I think I'll share just one more study and then we'll call it a day for today. This is related to the one that I just shared. This was another study that looked at what they called the consumer response to new products and services. I like this. They didn't just look at the first one was a general study of supplier participation and buyer strategic decisions, but this particular study conducted an investigation into consumer response to new product services, and they then using the response or the result of this study, they now began to adapt their marketing strategies, right? Because based on the response they got from the consumers, they could now tell, they could guide entrepreneurs, right? Those who are inventing with an entrepreneurial mindset, they could guide them accordingly, so they will know what to do, what not to do, what to emphasize, what not to emphasize, what to spend more on and what to spend less on, all to the end that there can be an effective commercialization of the new products and services. I hope that you understand where we are going with all of this. First of all, it's not innovation for the sake of innovation, it's innovation for the sake of economic growth, right? And once you're talking about innovation for the sake of economic growth, you're definitely talking about stimulating demand, you're talking about maintaining demand, you're talking about selling profitably, And all of those things need to be understood, right? It's not just about making assumptions when you're inventing or when you're creating, and that's why you pilot, that's why you test the market, that's why you also improve products, that's why you come up with new models, because sometimes what the market does is it gives you a silent feedback, whether they accept it wholly or whether they accept it partially. Those are feedbacks, those are things to be studied, those are things to be investigated. Why is there such a high demand for this and not a high demand for that? Why is there even a seasonal demand? Sometimes you have a seasonal demand. What are the factors responsible for this, and what can we do to respond, to adapt, to fine-tune, right? It is very, very doable. You can fully commercialize your research, but to do that, to have full-scale returns, full-level returns on your innovation investment, you have to be very in tune with the market. And that's why I said some of my favorite studies from what I checked are those that actually looked at the supplier participation and the buyer strategic decisions, and also those that looked at consumer response to new products and services. It's important. It's not just about the product, it's also about the market behavior, the market response, the supplier behavior, the supplier attitude, and so on and so forth. Those things will help you know exactly what aspects of your creations or your inventions the market may need or may not need, or the market may not yet respond to, that you still have to do some work on to get them to respond to. Well, I think this is where we are going to draw a curtain on this edition of the program, Driving Economic Growth with Innovation. Remember, it's not just about innovation, it's about innovation for the sake of economic growth, and that means you must be very in tune with the economy, you must be very aware of the market factors, you must be very aware of how the market is responding to the inventions, to what aspects of inventions, how do we modify, how do we upscale, how do we even eliminate some parts of the invention that the market may not need completely or may not yet need. That is, that does not mean that invention would be, thrown away, but it means that it may not necessarily be scaled, right? Because the market may not yet be ready for it, or to be honest, it may never be ready for it for a long time to come, right? So these are the things to put in mind, so that as we are researching and as we are, as we are inventing, as we are creating, we are also doing it with a full entrepreneurial mindset, at the level of the individual or the organization, and at the level of the nation. We are doing all of innovation, we are driving all our innovation activities with a full mindset, with full orientation of economic growth, with a full strategic intent, if I can use that expression, with a policy goal of economic growth and development. Once again, this is Tolu Amada on Amoge Radio Communications. It's been nice doing this with you. We look forward to having you same time, same station next week, and we'll go on to another aspect of economic growth and innovation, right? We look forward to being back same time, same station next week. Until then, my colleagues will be here at 5 p.m. West African time and 12 noon Eastern time, all the way through Friday. You can also check us out on Facebook, or you can follow all our social media pages, Instagram, LinkedIn at Amogate. You can also check out our YouTube page. You'll find us, the Amoge Radio Communications. You'll find high-level policy-rich sessions that we've had, my colleagues and I have had, and we continue to bring to you on several issues, from strategy to economy to innovation, and so many rich issues that you can derive a lot from as a nation, as an institution, as an organization, and of course also as an individual looking to grow his or our own relevance and impact, right? We can also check out our website, www.amoge.org. You can reach out to us on Amoge. We'd like to partner with you, to work with you, to grow with you, to develop with you, and together we can build nations that are worthy of emulation. We can build institutions that will be very transgenerational, and we can build organizations that will live long after we are gone. Thank you so much again. I'll be back same time, same station next week. Until then, don't just think innovation, but also think economic growth and development. Thank you.